Afternoon. Happy Friday. I hope everyone is staying safe. Here in North Texas, times continue to be a little bit chaotic, and as we're making decisions for our kids' upcoming school year, which is scheduled to start on the 24th, I find myself doubting the decisions that I'm making. We're currently en route to Colorado to take our sophomore back to the University of Colorado at Boulder. But nevertheless, they've already determined that their first semester, at least, is going to be completely online. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the Fundamentalist-Modernist controversy and the schism that erupted in Protestant denominations over a few key tenets. So let's get started. Every denomination in every major religion will face at some point a schism. Christianity has faced a schism with the Protestant Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And the Presbyterian Church faced a schism over the role of Christianity, the authority of Scripture, death, resurrection of Jesus, and two broad factions within the Protestant denomination emerged, the Fundamentalists and the Modernists. Of course, the Fundamentalists insisted on the timeless validity of the doctrines of orthodoxy. The Modernists, on the other hand, advocated an adaptation of religion in response to new scientific discoveries that were being found and the moral pressures of the age, slavery being one of those issues. Initially, the Presbyterian Church was the center of the schism, but eventually it spread to every denomination, particularly the Lutherans were involved. And what was at the core of this was the Scopes trial. I hate to say the core of it. It was more the nail in the coffin for fundamentalism, as much so in combination with William Jennings Bryan's demise. The Scopes trial was based on a law in Tennessee sponsored by State Representative John Butler, who had lobbied state legislatures to pass anti-evolution laws, and he had succeeded when it was passed in 1925. Now, Butler later had said that he didn't know anything about evolution per se, but he'd read in the papers that children were coming home from school and telling their parents that the Bible was nonsense, something that, as a Christian, he was not going to stand for. Tennessee governor signed the bill into law to gain support among the rural legislators, but really didn't believe the law was going to be enforced, nor would it interfere with education in the Tennessee schools. When the lawsuit came to pass, when the trial came to pass, it was around a substitute science teacher named Scopes, who, by his own admission, wasn't necessarily teaching evolution outright, but he also admitted that he was willing to play the role in order for the trial to commence. In response to the charges, the ACLU intended to oppose the Butler Act on the grounds that it violated the teachers' rights and academic freedom and was therefore unconstitutional. Eventually, this trial became a media circus, drawing in William Jennings Bryan. If I recall, it was G.L. Mackin that was set to testify as part of Bryan's group of comrades that he was bringing in, but he declined eventually, and so did another, citing a previous engagement. Eventually, yes, Scopes was found guilty, but when the judge declared that in the defense testimony based on the Bible was irrelevant and should not be presented to the jury, the trial judge asked Bryan to come so he could question him on his beliefs of the Bible, as their own experts have been rendered irrelevant. Clarence Darrow had planned this day before and called Bryan a Bible expert. On the seventh day, when Clarence Darrow put Bryan on the stand, Bryan was unable to answer the questions that Clarence Darrow presented. I'm not speculating as to whether they were necessarily fair questions, but Bryan answered the questions involving Genesis, questions about whether Eve was actually created from Adam's rib, where Cain got his wife, things of that nature, things that, for the biblical literist, it is as God said it was. But for those that were willing to take a more evolutionary view, a more modernist view, just a belief in the Bible wasn't sufficient to condemn a scientific viewpoint. In one particular question, Darrow asked where Cain got his wife, and Bride answered that he would leave the agnostics to hunt for her. And when Darrow addressed the issue of the temptation of Eve by the serpent, Bryan insisted the Bible be quoted verbatim rather than allowing Darrow to paraphrase it in his own terms. Ultimately, Scopes was convicted. It was overturned eventually, but the long-term impact of this trial was it served to discredit William Jennings Bryan, a man who had twice ran for president, who had served on the cabinet of Woodrow Wilson's administration, and whom I believe that if he had not left in 1915, that perhaps we wouldn't have gotten involved in the war. Alternative history theories aside, I believe it would have been better for us to have gotten involved in the war earlier, but that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, what it did was it served to discredit Bryan's reputation, especially when a Southern publisher used Bryan as the example for Southern anti-intellectualism. I believe the fundamentalist movement would have continued gathering a little bit more steam. They certainly had the wind knocked out of their sails with the Scopes trial, had it not been for Bryan's death. When Bryan died, there was no other fundamentalist leader who was able or had the leadership, the name, the charisma to take charge of the movement as Bryan had done. But ultimately, the trial revealed the growing chasm in American Christianity and that schism and the two ways of finding the truth, one being biblical, the fundamentalist, one being evolutionary. Author Mark Edwards says that the conventional view in the wake of the Scopes trial of humiliated fundamentalism retreated into the political and cultural background, a viewpoint which is evidenced in the film Inherit the Wind from 1960, as well as the majority of contemporary historical accounts. And as we know, the debate between fundamentalism and modernism still continues. There are still those that are biblical literists, and they're of course entitled to their biblical view as their belief. There are others that are willing to accept scientific changes as part of God's larger work that he chose not to reveal through those who wrote his scriptures. And my point is not to debate any of those sides or to even, take a side on that. And as a historian, I believe we should all be unbiased as much as we possibly can, regardless of our personal views. So we will just leave that one there. I hope everyone is having a great Friday. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and stay safe.